from exploration to discovery, and maybe just a pinch of full-scale galactic conquest involved. Welcome to Galactic Civilizations 4. Today I'll be laying the foundations to allow you to master the galaxy. Thank you to Stardock for sponsoring this video. There'll be a link right at the top of the description below where you can click through my link to check out Galciv 4. I'd highly appreciate it if you did. And now, without any mucking around and with time cards below, let's jump straight in to Galactic Civilizations 4. It's really important that you start right, so let's begin in the beginning, where of course, as I mentioned in my last video on Galciv, we start with the wonderful alien GPT, designed with but a short description of a faction that I can dream of, and a little bit of customization around the side in terms of behaviors, cultural affinity, planet type, map theme. We'll pull together a custom civilization. I feel like it's a necessity for Galactic Civilizations 4 to engage with this, and as usual, it doesn't disappoint. Now, while we're mainly laying cosmetic foundations here, selecting an image, we also have some important gameplay decisions to make here, starting a game. For example, civilization abilities and civilization traits. Now, these will have a big impact on the culture of our people, the kinds of things in the culture trees that we might be able to adopt more readily, and our overall playstyle as well. Generally speaking, you can't go wrong sticking near the middle, taking a -1 and a +1 in areas that you're maybe less or more interested in. I find that reaching out to the extremes will obviously have a more extreme impact on gameplay, so for beginners, it's probably best to stick along that middle row, though I would encourage you to experiment wildly. I would also encourage you to play around with the galaxy settings. Don't forget that there's a lot to play with here. How close do you want enemies to be? How hostile would you like them to be? And the overall pacing can be sped up. And of course, this is a big game, so keep that in mind in your setup. Now let's move through to colonizing the stars and settle into the game a little bit more after that whirlwind introduction. You'll begin with some fairly basic ships and pick up more as you move through. Civilian, trade, military, you name it. As the world expands around you, obviously the automated probes are perhaps the best way to remove that fog, that uncertainty, and start to plot out the stars. And of course, you want to make sure that you're surveying an adequate amount of anomalies as well, for all kinds of rewards that we might touch on a little later. Though perhaps most importantly, for your build order, for your unit turn order, for everything that you're planning, your colony ship, which you can send to automatically colonize planets, though you might also want to take a little bit of care in picking out the ones that are most important to you. Now, these early planets won't be core worlds just yet. More on that later in the video, but when they are a core world, or indeed your starting planet, you'll be able to engage with them at a much more granular 4x level. Here you can see building districts that also provide adjacency bonuses and other unique effects or penalties depending on the terrain where they're built. I'd recommend that you upgrade these basic districts as much as you can by unlocking the upgrades through the tech tree as you develop your core worlds. Ship builders can also be constructed around these worlds where you'll continue to build up that arsenal. Initially, I would recommend of mainly civilian ships, probes, prospectors, and perhaps also ships to boost your economy, like these asteroid miners here, for example, a fairly cheap and easy pickup in the early game to help provide a little bit more production to a nearby world, which of course the colonies will do, as will our starbases. And these are another big way to expand your influence over the world and the many potential worlds around it. You have military, communications, and mining options, though you can upgrade these different starbases with other upgrades or modules from other types. So this mining base, for example, could later be retrofitted with some military defense technology modules, for example. So they are kind of an all-in-one gimme. They'll help you paint the map, pick up some extra area, bring it under your influence, your zone of control, but they'll also allow you to pick up extra resources, extra minerals and materials you could maybe sell later. You could construct them offensively or defensively, so do choose your positioning carefully. Putting them up against an enemy border, while it may help your influence, maybe establish a foothold, you could very well lose control of it over the long run, or the ability to defend it. There are also some pretty interesting things buried in and around you, and probably very far away from you, as well. For example, this xenoarchaeology lab allows me to research a precursor relic, potentially unlocking some of the many unknowns that surround us. There's some nice flavor elements here too. Next up, on leadership matters, because actually it really does. There's a double meaning here. When you start the game, you'll be tasked with, well, actually picking from a very small selection of candidates. Take note of their loyalty, you'll want it to be above 30, and also of their stats, from intelligence to social stats, through to diligence, or indeed their ability to command a fleet, their resolve. These stats will vary and the cost will vary, and you'll want to try and match up the stats with their ministerial portfolios if you're looking to appoint some of these leaders as ministers. Which you should do, because you'll get a variety of different boosts to the relevant ministerial portfolio, but also some broader impacts in and around the game will start to be unlocked for you as you assign leaders. Assigning them to planets as governors will unlock core worlds. Diplomats might improve your relations with other people, very handy potentially to have depending on the kind of playthrough that you're running, or you could put people into factions as well to boost certain yields. The final decision that you might choose to make when you're recruiting would be to assign commanders. And as we'll see shortly, this will allow us to command special fleets that spawn into our world and hopefully lead us to victory. Governors and ministers are powerful basically right from the word go. Of course, the minister here for technology unlocking a third slot inside of this research bonus category. And we covered this in a previous video, so I won't delve into the tech tree here, but I would recommend that you grab the bonus and pick from here as much as you possibly can. Now, on to something a little more aggressive. War and conquest, which is of course fueled by our ships, and in the beginning, you'll start with but a few fighters once you unlock them through the tree. If you don't want to take the diplomatic route, which again is something we delved into in some detail last time, it is a great system. A quick tip that I'd recommend for you if you're choosing to not go aggressive would be to trade some technologies early on, or maybe get access to their star system with an open borders agreement. Some of these things, alongside maybe negotiating aid if you really need it, will be beneficial early on, particularly trading for technologies. It can give you a nice boost ahead, and actually the relevance and utility doesn't wane away over time, proving to be pretty useful as you move through the game too. Back to Conquest though, let's assume diplomacy didn't quite go your way. When you trigger a fight, if you don't choose to have it sort of quick complete, auto-complete, you can watch it play out here, right down into that beautiful granular detail down the bottom of your screen, which you can choose to turn off if you'd prefer to watch more of a cinematic battle. Obviously, a lot of the strategy involved here is before the cinematic battles kick off though. It's where you're positioning your ships, and also what you've put inside of your fleet. Don't forget, you'll want a little bit of a variety most of the time, at least for a general fleet, with larger command ships often, as you can see here, sitting at the back with their immense firepower, while lighter, faster ships will essentially lead the way, screening potential damage, taking out maybe more cumbersome, poorly defended enemies. And of course, your tech unlocks will be vital here too. A quick note on sieging worlds, there may be some defenders who fly out to fight you off first, so it could be useful to send two fleets, one to siege with specific equipment. Now, on to executive function, something you may or may not struggle with, but the power of the executive in this game shouldn't be understated. One of the unique things that you'll get to engage with is the executive orders system, literally executive in the name. Now, at the start of the game, and it will depend a lot on who you're playing, the kinds of values you have, what your species is, but there are some very powerful effects. Draft colonists, perhaps the most powerful, fairly cheap. You can get a free colony ship online. I'd highly encourage you to take advantage of that if you have it. Otherwise, you might be looking to maybe increase your economy. Maybe it's by printing money, for example, another reasonable one to kick off with. The executive orders themselves, though, don't just have to be used right at the start, and you can use them in a variety of ways. They leverage a resource called control, difficult to improve sometimes. I'd encourage you to grab improvements wherever you see them, and it's very, very powerful. It's really fun to use as well because it can be a little bit reactive, which is a nice change of pace. Likewise, inside of the vault, those non-executive orders, but rather those rewards that we've earned, or perhaps discovered across the galaxy from anomalies provide a whole load of really fun, instant actions, just like the executive orders. These ones may be a little spicier from time to time. Ones with sabotage are particularly interesting to me. Or, of course, you could use them to buff a variety of things as well, including, for example, buildable space inside of one of your core worlds, giving you more space to place more districts. And our executive function doesn't end here. I know I mentioned it last time, but we should really make a note of the cultural progression system here as well. Driven a lot, partly by your ideological discount. What is the ideology of your people? What have you progressed through or unlocked so far? What kind of traits did you give to your civilians? And what decisions have you made throughout the many different events and discovery options that have taken place throughout Galactic Civilizations 4? All of that comes together to give you potentially a discount on these cultural policies, this progression through a lot of very interesting and at times very powerful cultural abilities. My tips and experience here would be to focus in on one, maybe two of these trees. Not only will you get to the very powerful thing, maybe the singularity, faster, but it will also, in general, be easier to construct, probably around a build, particularly where ideology is involved. Now, of course, governing doesn't just stop there. The policies that we talked about in my last video are very important too for providing overall civilization-wide benefits or penalties and drawbacks. Often a bit of a trade-off here. Try and look for the positive as much as you can. And of course, pay attention over to the left-hand side of the screen as well. Particularly your approval. You really want to make sure that that's in the green in this game. And play around with the tax rate a little bit too. Maybe make a little bit more money, but lose a bit of approval and research. It's up to you. I try and keep it as low as I can. And that brings us through to perhaps the final point, to kind of bring all of this together. One thing that you should be monitoring, whether you're governing, whether you're assigning leaders or waging war, is victory. Now, victory can be checked at any time. Up in the top right-hand side of the screen, you'll see not only your top competitor, but also your progress. In particular here, you should pay attention to the areas that you're doing well and the areas that you're not doing so well. There could be an easy opportunity to pick up a little bit of extra score in somewhere where you haven't yet scored, for example. Hitting the escape key, of course, will open a menu, and inside of here you'll find the victory status view, which is arguably an even better way to visualize your progress. Here you can see victory split across Conquest, Culture, Prestige, and Alliance. Each one should be factoring in the back of your mind, though you can viably shoot for more than one of these at a time. Conquest taking out every enemy, cultural influence, holding peace, influence and control over the galaxy. Prestige victory, that one we talked about before, combining everything we do, and an alliance victory for a perma peace. And also there are victory options down the bottom here too. I think that's a really nice touch. And on that nice touch, that brings us to the end of today's video. Hopefully from across, whether it be war and conquest, back to some of the early tips around colonizing the stars and leadership matters, you've been able to pick up some useful insights to lay the foundations to master the galaxy in Galactic Civilizations 4, which of course again, there will be a link below that you can check out. Thanks to Stardock for sponsoring this video. I'll see you next time.